Hello dear chess fans, my name is Eugene Grinis. Welcome to my free chess school, from beginners to advanced, open for everyone who want to improve own game. This video, with some tactical exercises, is intended for the beginners. There are some practical opening rules for beginners which are usually worth remembering. These rules are: 1. Open with either the e-pawn or the d-pawn. 2. Wherever possible, make a good developing move which threatens something. 3. Develop knights before bishops. 4. Pick the most suitable square for a piece and develop it there once and for all. Or do not move your piece twice without a strong reason. 5. Make 1 or 2 pawn moves in the opening, not more. 6. Do not bring your queen out early. 7. Castle as soon as possible, preferably on the king's side. 8. Play to get control of the center. 9. Always try to maintain at least 1 pawn in the center. 10. Do not sacrifice without a clear reason. 11. Complete your development before you attack. 12. Pay attention to your opponent's moves. 13. Avoid exchanging bishops for knights. And rule number 14. Fight for space. Now let's take a look at the following game. e4, rule number 1. e5. Both whites and blacks' initial moves, e4 and e5, are perfectly natural and normal. Both assist development and affect central squares. Rule number 8. Play to get control of the center. Most of the openings after e4, e5, open games, lead to open positions. Rapid effective development and king safety are the most important factors. In most of these openings, the key move for black to equalize is d7, d5. It may be adopted as a good working rule that once black succeeds in playing d5 without any immediate harmful consequences, he has equalized. d4, attacking the central e5 pawn with a pawn. Pawn takes pawn on d4, the best continuation. c3, white sacrifices a pawn. Pawn takes pawn on c3, accepting the gambit. Bishop c4, developing the bishop and sacrificing the second pawn. This opening is called Danish Gambit. A gambit is an opening where one player gives up material with the intention of securing an advantage in time or space. In Danish Gambit, white gives up 2 pawns to get excellent diagonals for his bishops. Black can, if he wishes, accept everything and hold on to it, but white's attack is extremely hard to meet. Pawn takes pawn on b2, bishop takes pawn, developing the bishop. d6. Beta was d5, giving a pawn back and forcing a favorable simplification. Let's go back to the game. d6 was played. Knight f3, developing the knight. Bishop to g4, developing the bishop before knights, rule number 3, and pinning the knight on f3. But this is a mistake. Beta was knight c6, developing the knight before bishops, rule number 3, with an equal game. Let's go back to the game. Bishop g4 was played. In this position, white has a strong move. What is the right continuation for white in this position? Please pause the video. White plays bishop takes pawn on f7, check, sacrificing the bishop. King takes bishop on f7. But why did white sacrifice the bishop? Can you show the next white's move? Please pause the video. White plays knight e5, check. The knight can be taken by the pawn, since white simply takes the queen. Let's go back to the game. Bishop takes f7, king takes bishop, knight e5, check, king to e8 was played. Knight takes bishop on g4. Now black has an extra pawn, but his king remains in the center, and therefore white has an advantage. Knight f6, developing the knight, but this is a losing move. Beta was knight c6, developing the knight, with an advantage for white. Let's go back to the game. Knight f6 was played. Now, can you find next white's move in this position? Please pause the video. Knight takes knight on f6, check, pawn takes knight. How white continues his attack? Please pause the video. Queen h5, check. King to e7 was played. If king to d7, then follows queen f5, check, king e8, bishop takes pawn on f6, a double attack, for example, queen to d7, bishop takes rook on h8, and white has an extra rook. Let's go back to the game. King to e7 was played. Now, how can white win material in this position? Please pause the video. White plays. Bishop takes pawn on f6 check. In this position, black actually resigned. Why? After king takes bishop on f6, can you find next white's move in this position? Please pause the video. Queen h4 check, winning the queen. After king to f7, queen takes queen on d8. Now let's take a look at the following game. e4, rule number 1. e5, d4, attacking the e5 pawn with a pawn. Pawn takes pawn, the best continuation in this position. c3, white sacrifices a pawn. Pawn takes pawn on c3, accepting the gambit. Bishop c4, developing the bishop and sacrificing the second pawn. Danish Gambit. Pawn takes pawn on b2, bishop takes pawn, and black plays bishop b4 check, developing the bishop, knight c3, developing the knight, queen to g5, attacking the pawn on g2. This is not the best move. Black brings his queen out early. Rule number 6, do not bring your queen out early. Better was d5, giving a pawn back. Bishop takes pawn on d5, bishop takes knight on c3 check, bishop takes bishop. White has two strong bishops, but knight f6, attacking the bishop on d5 and the pawn on e4. For example, knight f3, developing the knight. Knight takes bishop on d5, pawn takes knight, queen e7 check, king f1, black castles. Rule number 7, secure your king, castle as soon as possible, preferably on the king's side. Queen to d4, threatening mate in 1 on g7. Queen f6, a good move. Queen takes queen, pawn takes queen on f6, bishop takes pawn on f6, winning a pawn back. Knight d7, attacking the bishop on f6, with a good position for black. Let's go back to the game. Queen g5 was played. In another game, black played knight to f6, developing the knight and attacking the e4 pawn. Knight g to e2, developing the knight and sacrificing the e4 pawn. Knight takes pawn on e4. Now black has 3 extra pawns. White castles. Rule number 7. Secure your king, castle as soon as possible, preferably on the king's side. Knight takes knight on c3. Knight takes knight. Black castles. Knight d5, attacking the bishop on b4. Bishop to c5. Only black's bishop is developed, the other pieces are not. Now, can you find next white's move in this position? Please pause the video. White played knight f6 check, sacrificing the knight. If here king to h8, then follows queen to h5, threatening mate in 1 on h7 and attacking the bishop on c5. h6, queen f5, threatening mate in 1, g6, queen to f4, threatening mate in 1 on h6. King g7. Now, what is the right continuation for white in this position? Please pause the video. Knight g4 check. King g8. Queen takes pawn on h6, threatening mate in 1 on g7, on h8, or on g6. And black has no defense. White is winning. Let's go back to this position. Knight f6 check was played. Pawn takes knight. White continued with queen g4 check, king h8, the only move. Queen h4, attacking the f6 pawn with 2 pieces. Bishop e7, defending the f6 pawn. Now, can you find mate in 3 in this position? Please pause the video. The first move is bishop d3, threatening mate in 1 on h7. Black has no defense. He can't play f6, f5, since the f6 pawn is pinned by the bishop. After h5, if you didn't find mate in 3, can you find mate in 2 in this position? Please pause the video. Queen takes pawn on h5, check, king g7. If you didn't find mate in 2, can you find mate in 1 in this position? You have 5 seconds for it. Please pause the video. Queen h7, checkmate. Mate with queen and bishop worth remembering. Let's go back to our game. Queen to g5 was played. Knight f3, developing the knight, sacrificing the g2 pawn and attacking the queen. Black plays queen to c5, attacking the bishop on c4. If queen takes pawn on g2, attacking the rook on h1, then follows rook g1, attacking the queen, queen h3. Now white could take the pawn on g7 with a rook, but even better is bishop takes pawn on f7, check. Can black take the bishop with the king? King takes on f7. What should white play in this position? Please pause the video. White plays knight g5, check, forking the king and the queen and winning the game. Let's go back to this position. Bishop takes pawn on f7, check, king f8, defending the g7 pawn. Now white continues with queen to d4, attacking the g7 pawn and the bishop on b4. Bishop takes knight on c3, check. Queen takes bishop, defending the knight on f3. Knight f6, developing the knight. Now, what is the best continuation for white in this position? Please pause the video. Rook takes pawn on g7, sacrificing a rook. If now king takes rook, can you find mate in 3 in this position? Please pause the video. The first move is queen takes knight on f6, check. King f8, the only move. If you didn't find mate in 3, can you find mate in 2 in this position? Please pause the video. Bishop g6, check, or bishop h5, check. King g8, the only response. If you didn't find mate in 2, can you find mate in 1 in this position? There are 4 different ways to mate in 1 here. Please find all of them. Please pause the video. Queen f7, checkmate, or queen g7, checkmate, or queen takes rook, checkmate, or queen d8, checkmate. Let's go back to this position. Rook takes pawn on g7, sacrificing a rook. Queen to h6, attacking the rook on g7 and defending the knight on f6. Now follows rook to g6, sacrificing the rook and attacking the queen. Pawn takes rook on g6. Queen takes knight on f6, threatening mate in 2. Rook to h7. Bishop takes pawn on g6, check. King g8. Queen d8, check. Queen f8, the only response. Now, how can white win material in this position? Please pause the video. Bishop takes rook on h7, check. The bishop has to be taken. If king to f7, can you find mate in 1 in this position? You have 10 seconds for it. Please pause the video. Knight g5, checkmate. Let's go back to this position. Bishop takes rook on h7. King takes bishop. Queen takes queen, threatening mate in 1 on g7. King to g6. Can you find mate in 2 in this position? Please pause the video. Queen g7, check. Or queen f6, check. King h5, the only move. If you didn't find mate in 2, can you find mate in 1 in this position? You have 5 seconds for it. Please pause the video. Queen g5, checkmate. Mate with queen and knight worth remembering. Let's go back to the game. Queen to c5 was played. Queen to b3, defending the bishop on c4 and attacking the pawn on f7 with 2 pieces. Knight h6, developing the knight and defending the f7 pawn. White castles. Rule number 7, secure your king castle as soon as possible, preferably on the king's side. And black castles too. Knight d5, attacking the bishop on b4 with 2 pieces. Bishop a5 was played. Now, how can white win material in this position? Please pause the video. White plays bishop a3, attacking the queen. And in this position, Black actually resigned. Why? His queen is trapped. If now queen to c6, how can white win the queen in this position? Please pause the video. Knight e7 check, forking the queen, the king and the queen, winning. Okay, that's the lesson for today from the Eugene Grinis Chess School. I hope it was useful and you enjoyed it. If so, push likes and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And the last question for today. Did you find an Easter egg in this video? This is another interesting video for you. Firstly, you can always find it in the video description, and secondly, you can catch it in the last seconds of the video. Thanks for watching.